Hey everyone, it's Marvin. Thanks so much for listening to Books and Boba. I just wanted to take a quick second to remind you that Books and Boba just launched our Patreon to help support our future endeavors. Rira and I have been running Books and Boba for the last 6.5 years, and we've always talked about wanting to do more, including expanding our content offerings, being able to go to book events and do more coverage. And so to help us get closer to those ambitions, we started a Patreon to help us grow and to better support books by Asian and Asian American authors. We are offering 2 tiers for our Patreon. The first is our regular Boba member coming in at $3 a month, which will give you access to our brand new Books and Boba Discord server so you can engage with your fellow Books and Boba Club members and also Rira and myself in real time. This is where we'll be aiming to move the bulk of our book club discussions, but rest assured we'll still have a presence on Goodreads as well. And our premium tier is our Honey Boba member tier coming in at $5 a month, where in addition to access to our Discord server, you'll also get access to our monthly Boba Chats, a bonus podcast where Rira and I and some guests will get together each month and have a more casual discussion on stuff that may or may not be book related, as well as answer some listener Q&A. Honey Boba members will also have access to a poll to help decide an official Books and Boba book pick once per quarter. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, support Books and Boba on Patreon by going to patreon.com/booksandboba. As always, Rira and I really appreciate your support. All right, thanks for listening, and I'm on with the show.
You're listening to Whoa! Potluck.
And you are listening to Books and Boba, a book club and podcast featuring books by Asian and Asian American authors. My name is Marvin Yue.
And I'm Rira Yu.
And this is the first Books and Boba episode of 2023. Rira, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Yeah.
But of course, if you guys are not ready for the new year, don't worry. Lunar New Year is coming up at the end of January, so you can hold on to your resolutions.
It's only practice New Year for the real New Year coming up.
Yes.
Year of the Rabbit. If you're wondering why we're coming at you with our book discussion about a week or so late, it's because right before the New Year, I came down with COVID and just recently emerged from my quarantine. So apologies for that. But
what a way to end 2022.
I know, right? I was doing so good. And then all of a sudden, and it wasn't like, so I caught it probably at a friend's Christmas gathering, which wasn't really that big. One of my friends from that gathering tested positive, so she let everyone know. And out of everyone who went to that gathering, I was the only one that caught it. So lucky me, I guess.
So, like, how has it been with living with your partner? Have you just been like secluding yourself in your room?
I mean, we also live with her mother, so I've been literally just isolated. It's essentially like living in a quarantine hotel. I just get delivered food twice a day, and other than that, I just was left the heck alone. The good thing is I was able to quarantine in my master bedroom, which has an attached bathroom. So,
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
Didn't have to contaminate our common areas, but I definitely starved for human interaction. So I'm super happy to be talking to you right now, Rira, even though...
That's you as the extrovert. I feel like if I was in quarantine, I would be completely fine. But I'm glad that you're feeling better. I was very worried about you. And I was just like, wow, the Rona caught him. Like, after all these years.
And the thing is, like, now that I've caught it, I don't feel any bolder. Now I'm even more, like, worried out there. It's like, I was safe and I still caught it. That means I need to be extra safe now.
Yeah, I had a lot of holiday plans with friends and whatnot. And all of them, they didn't get COVID, but they got, like, the flu or RSV. There's a lot of plagues going around. So it ended up, like, I hung out with my family, but for a very short period of time. And then I was left to my own devices. And I was like, wow, everybody everybody is sick. I guess it's a good thing that I'm pretty much by myself now. But anyway, I hope everyone is having a good New Year so far, at least a better one than Marvin health-wise.
Yeah, I mean, it's a late start, but I'm excited to get 2023 for Books and Boba started. We are, of course, discussing our December/January book pick, Babel by R.F. Kuang. We have split this book into two parts. So, for this episode, we will be discussing the first two parts or books of Babel, and we will be discussing the rest of it for our January episode. With that said, we will be discussing all plot points within the first 12 chapters. So if you have not read up to there, don't want to be spoiled, catch up and listen in to our discussion. We will not be discussing anything past chapter 12 because we have not read it yet. But if you have finished the book and want to discuss, please let us know on our Goodreads forums, and we will try to incorporate your comments in our January episode. But yeah, should we get started?
Yeah, sure. All right, so Babel, or The Necessity of Violence and Arcane History of the Oxford Translators' Revolution, it takes place in the 1830s, and it follows a Chinese-British boy named Robin Swift. And he is taken to England, or more specifically London, the World Center for Translation, and more importantly, the magic of silverworking. So silverworking is the art of manifesting the meaning lost in translation using enchanted silver bars. And it has made the British Empire unparalleled in power, and it continues to run the engine of the empire's quest for colonization. So book 1 and book 2, there's quite a lot of time passes across those two books. So book 1 begins in 1828, where Robin is unnamed at this point, and he is the only survivor in his village from a cholera outbreak. And then towards like halfway around book 1, he is old enough to enroll into the Royal Institution of Translation, or better known as Babel, at Oxford College. And the book continues on through the terms that he studies at Babel. So a number of years pass in book 1 and book 2. But before we get into the details of each book, Marvin, what did you think overall, first impression?
Well, I've been a longtime fan of Rebecca's work, R.F. Kuang's work, and I just really enjoyed her take on dark academia, or at this point still just academia with dark undertones, because we are talking about the British Empire at the height of its power, right, during the Victorian era. Or at this point, it starts pre-Victorian.
It's the Georgian era.
And I think doesn't Victoria come into power sometime within this time period?
So right now, King William IV is in power. And then towards the end of book 2, you get to Victoria's coronation. So that's around 1837, I think.
Yeah. And, like Rira said, this book spans at this point probably 10 years?
Yeah, probably.
Probably more like 8 years, right? Because Robin gets rescued, quote unquote, when he was around 10, I want to say. And one would assume, if we are mapping it to modern day, matriculates into Oxford when he's 18-ish.
I don't know if the ages were the time of enrollment was the same as it is now. It could have been younger back then, but yes, he is a late teen by the time he gets into Oxford.
Yeah. And, reading these first two books, it reminded me of the first half of the Poppy War, when it was still just a war academia book before it turned into a grimdark war story. So, knowing what R.F. Kuang likes to do to her readers, I am bracing myself for the inevitable violence, as alluded to by the title, but really enjoying the not only the interactions between the Robin's cohort at Oxford, but also just the world building of the magic system of silverworking as like an allegory for British imperial power, right? Colonial power. The fact that they take language from their colonial states to enrich their own power is like, it's really smart and it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. This was probably the most anticipated fantasy book of 2022. Babel came out in August. And even before that, even before publication, there was just so much buzz from the book community who received the arcs. And you can really tell that Rebecca was an Oxford student at one point because her descriptions of the campus and the culture there, you can't really, it's like insider's information. You cannot get that level of detail if you did not experience it for yourself.
Yeah, I remember her posting about like studying in a library in Oxford and being in front of two statues of bearded white men, just like staring at her while she like was undergoing her language studies.
Yeah, for background info, Rebecca Kuang, she has 2 master's degree, one master's in Chinese studies from Cambridge, and then she has a master's in contemporary Chinese studies from Oxford. And she is now studying for her PhD in East Asian languages and literatures at Yale. So she is very well into academia. And you can tell in the book that she knows her stuff and that she did an incredible amount of research. And for me, I guess like when we think about dark academia, the things that come to mind is obviously like the allure of high intellectual characters. You have usually it's like a magic system within a secret society. And there's a murder in like the middle of it all. So I don't know what people expected the magic system to be, but I was pleasantly surprised that it was low, quote unquote, low magic. So it was very practical magic and not so much like high fantasy, which I really appreciated.
How long did it take you to wrap your mind around like the concept of silverworking, like with match pairs and using language and what's lost in translation?
I mean, the concept of it, I got it right away, but the science of it, I was a little bit confused on how it actually works, but I had to really suspend my belief on that. I was like, it's alchemy. Just go with the flow.
Yeah, I mean, it's explained that the reason the magic works is because silver is made using Mercury, and Mercury is also another name for Hermes, the messenger of the gods. And so there's some like mystical stuff going on there. But I guess the concept of like, because the way that the silver working works is you write one word in English, right? And then one word in a foreign language. And then the silver bar, I guess, metabolizes the difference, like whatever meaning is lost in translation between the original language and English, like forms the magic, right? It creates an effect. And it kind of reminded me of, strangely enough, Full Metal Alchemist, like the idea of equivalent exchange, whereas energy, it's like, conservation of energy, right? Like energy cannot be lost. So, that magic, that meaning goes somewhere. And so the bar manifests that as a real world effect. And I think that's how I explained it to myself in my brain, how the science of it worked.
Yeah, I agree that it did remind me of Full Metal Alchemist. Also because there were a lot of rules to it as well. And rules that are based on science. So
yeah.
I was really impressed by the magic system. And I'm sure it gets more in detail as we go into book 3, 4, and 5, because we've only kind of like gotten a taste of what the silver bars can actually do.
I did clock the Chekhov's silver bars, how to destroy themselves. That I'm sure will come into play somewhere in book 4 or 5.
Yeah. But I guess the easiest way to go about our discussion is to, I guess, go over the plot of, I guess, the plot points for book 1 and book 2. So as we mentioned, Book one begins in 1828, Canton. Robin, who is unnamed at this point, is the only survivor in his village from a cholera outbreak. He is the only person in his family who is a survivor, and he is, quote unquote, rescued by Professor Lovell, a white British professor of a white British man from Oxford, and he uses silver to heal Robin.
Yeah. And, just to reiterate, he has a name, just not a name that means anything to the white man, right? So,
but we don't know what the name is. That's the thing. He is an unnamed character until he chooses the name Robin Swift, which is a name based on Gulliver's Travel. And you find out that Robin had a very peculiar childhood because not many Chinese boys in Canton grew up with a governess, a white governess, teaching them how to speak English perfectly and to read and comprehend different English phrases. So you kind of get a hint that Robin has been prepped for this moment to be plucked out of Canton and to be brought aboard the ship to take him to London.
Yeah. I mean, at this point in the story, we're already suspicious of
Professor never
Lovell.
Trust the white man in a story. Yeah.
But, I think I, like Robin, was holding on to hope that maybe this guy is maybe he's just very gruff because he's British, but he, has a soft center somewhere. That illusion was destroyed within the first few chapters. But I did like the fact that Robin was slowly starting to put together that he could have saved his mom if he wanted to. Professor Lovell, when he found out from the housekeeper that Professor Lovell was just chilling in Macau for 2 weeks, I think that's the first that was the first inkling that this guy doesn't really care.
Yeah, it was the first inkling that, okay, how did he show up in that village right on time for Robin to be healed? What was your opinion of him saying, hey, forget your Cantonese, Mandarin is more important? Because I feel like we still have that mindset today in modern society.
Yeah, I mean, it goes a little deeper than that, right? Mandarin was the official state language of China at the time as well. China is a country of a lot of different languages and dialects, but the official language of the government was Mandarin Chinese. And, there's a class aspect of it too, right? Cantonese, as with a lot of dialects, are typically spoken by commoners, right? Mandarin was a dialect used more from people from the scholar and government class, and Cantonese was more like a working class dialect too. So, there's a lot of aspects to that in addition to the colonialism. It wasn't just because the English decided this was it, but it was also we see from the interactions with Professor Lovell, he cares about class and civilization and stuff like that. If you're going to learn Chinese, you're going to learn the most civilized version of that.
Yeah, sophisticated version of the language. I think it's really funny because English was considered a commoner's language. In British court, French was used because that was the high court language. And it's just funny to me now that English is considered the quote unquote standard.
Yeah. Well, that was
the common tongue of the world.
That was until the Empire of France fell, right? And England became the number one empire in the world.
Yeah. I mean, this idea of the decline of empires and how power is transferred to another nation after war, after trade imbalance. It's repeated throughout the book.
Yeah, I have a question. How did did you read the book or did you listen to audiobook?
I read and listened to the audiobook. So the audiobook narrators are Chris Liu Kum Hoi, and Billy Fulford Brown. And Chris is pretty much the main narrator, whereas Billy is the footnotes narrator.
Right.
And Chris did an amazing job. Chris did an amazing job with the accents because there are a series, a myriad of accents the characters speak in this book.
Yeah, I also listened to the audiobook, and usually I just pick one or the other. But like when I was reading the book without the audiobook, I was like, I need the voices. I need the accents to like really complete the experience, because the narrator takes on like all the accents. Like for the housekeeper, he puts on a Scottish accent. For Victoire, who we meet later, he puts on a French accent, and it just made the whole experience much more, I guess, filling.
Yeah, and as someone who is not Chinese, like whenever I saw like Chinese characters, I was like, I don't know how to read that. I have no idea how that is pronounced. So it was really nice to actually have an auditory guide. And I found all of the footnotes to be really, really amusing.
Yeah, I didn't expect, I knew there would be footnotes, but I didn't expect the footnotes to also fill in like the world building and the narrative as well. I just thought it'd just be like asides, like factual asides.
Yeah, and a lot of the footnotes is based on real historical facts. However, some of them Rebecca took liberties and fictionalized them in a really funny way. So I really enjoyed reading all the footnotes. I know for some people they were annoyed by it because they were like, oh, these could have been their own chapters rather than have them like interrupt every so often. However, I feel like it would have been really hard to keep track of all of the microaggressions and just kind of like the history of racism at Babel if like those footnotes weren't there.
Yeah.
Like right then and there.
Yeah, I thought it was a really clever way to insert like secondary storytelling and asides without breaking up the narrative. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, like one of my favorite ones was the aside about Charles Dickens being a racist writer who like Robin loves Charles Dickens' writing, but he noticed that he really hates anyone who is not white. And there's a bunch of anecdotes about very famous white authors who are pretty much racist. And he's like, okay, I know that they're racist and their logic is flawed and biased. However, they write really good stuff.
Yeah, I mean, Rebecca definitely did not hold back in her criticisms of the classics and the viewpoints of those authors.
But going back to the story, so at the ship harbor right before Robin is to set sail for London, he is forced to translate for a Chinese sailor who has been denied work because the crewmate, the crew member is like, I don't want any Chinese people on board. What were your thoughts on Robin's, I guess, like decision in that situation?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of many compromises that he makes, right? Like
it's his first foray into, oh, okay, like in order for me to survive, I need to betray my countrymen.
Yeah, it's it's a theme that's ongoing, right? Like his conflict within himself, like to do what's necessary to maintain his position and keep his comforts versus what he feels in his heart is right. And for at least the foremost of these first two books, the drive for self-preservation wins out. Time and time again, he's shown that he's willing to stand up for what he believes in to a certain extent. But if it gets too dangerous, too risky, he balks. And that's very apparent in this first incident where he knows what he can do for this person and he knows what is right. But he also fears that in doing the right thing, he'll lose whatever it is he might gain. And so he decides to feign ignorance.
Yeah, and pretty much like he is fearing that, oh, if I'm causing too much trouble, the professor is going to think that I'm not worth the trouble.
That I am not the model minority that he believes
not
I
the
am.
Model minority. Yes, that is a recurring theme throughout this book. But Robin continues on to London, and then he arrives at Hampstead, which is where Professor Lovell lives. And there he studies Latin, Greek, and Mandarin in preparation for his enrollment into the Royal Institute of Translation. Wow. Like the the rigorousness of his studies was reminiscent, let's say, of some of my studies growing up.
Yeah, I mean, Professor Lovell is obviously a man of great standing and sophistication, and he demands a lot out of his ward. And in order to deserve to be his ward, he needs to always put in 110%. Anything less, as we find out,
ungratefulness.
Not only ungratefulness, but him allowing his base Chinese characteristics to take over, including like laziness and sloth. And we see that most apparent during one of the episodes in this chapter where Robin is late to a class because he was busy reading a book, which, same, I've been there. But instead of, getting a scolding, Professor Lovell goes full mask off, goes full racism mode and beats him down.
Yeah, and he's continuously saying, I only asked for one thing from you, which is you to put in 110% into your studies. And, if you're not willing to meet my standard, then I can always send you back to Canton. And you'll just die an insignificant orphan on the streets without any prospects. And I don't know, it kind of reminded me of, I don't know, like I guess Robin is an adoptee in a sense, and it just reminded me of what a lot of adoptees in my circles have said of just like feeling like they have to
feel grateful, right? They have to
feel grateful. Yeah. And it's like, oh, they were quote unquote rescued, and they're being awarded all of these privileges and higher education because they were adopted. So they should feel grateful to their adoptive parents.
Yeah. I mean, this chapter is when we kind of get a sense of what Professor Lovell's politics are, right? We get glimpses of his meetings with his smoking buddies or his gentleman friends, and they're all talking about how they can further exploit the colonies, right? How they can further improve the might of the empire through essentially capitalism, right? Like they're all dyed-in-the-wool capitalists.
And this is where we get a first glimpse or first hint that Robin is related to Professor Lovell, because one of the gentlemen in that scene, he says, "Oh my God, he looks just like you." And it was weird because in the beginning of the book, I had no inclination, like I had no idea that Robin was biracial.
I kind of suspected. They did mention here and there about how he doesn't look full Chinese, right?
I think there were hints here and there, but I just, it didn't register to me until that scene where I was like, oh, okay, he is mixed race. And it kind of makes sense where, Professor Lovell and Robin's education in Canton came to place with the white governess and all of these books that are very precious and expensive to ship. So I was like, okay, things are falling into place.
And then I guess we can move on now to when Robin goes to Oxford, right?
Robin finally gets enrolled into Babel, and he meets his roommate, Rami, who is originally from Calcutta.
I love this part because it reminds me of anytime I find myself in a very white space, I beeline to the closest person of color I see. And it's such a, if you've ever been in this situation, you know exactly what that feeling is, kind of feeling that sense of relief that there's someone there that is also other, right?
Yeah. And this is Robin's first time realizing he isn't the only one who's experienced being displaced from his homeland and being raised by a white man and being expected to be fluent in all of these languages in order to get into Oxford. He realizes that Rami also went through that experience. He realizes
that many children have been groomed for this express purpose of becoming a translator for the crown, essentially.
Yeah, and that's pretty much why Babel exists. And it is quite surprising, just like how insidious that is, like how insidious it gets when it comes to exploiting these children who were plucked away from their homes.
I mean, one of the big themes that emerged from the book is just how closely academia is tied to the activity of empire, right? Even look at today, like a lot of research and technology done in universities, a lot of them get their money and get their funding and get their applications done through the military, through military applications, through government applications, before they even become like medicine or anything else. Or like, the internet started as a military project, right?
I actually don't know if it started out as a military project. Yeah. Oh, it did. Okay, well, learn something new every single day. I knew that GPS was like a military technology until it got opened up to public domain. But anyway, but later on, there's a scene where Rami and Robin, they're harassed by drunk Oxford students who are pretty much demanding Rami to take off his uniform because they're like, what are you doing? You're not white. You have brown skin. You don't belong here. And that is like their first experience of racism at their school.
First close encounter with racist violence. They've been microaggressed the entire 2 or 3 weeks they were there, right? There are people who won't serve them, people who think they're dirty, people who won't seat them. But this was the first time they felt like they were in physical danger.
Yeah, and it was also Robin's first time realizing that he has privilege of, not being dark skinned. He could blend in whereas Rami cannot. And that's a different level of harassment that he experiences compared to Rami. And anyway, Robin runs away from the encounter and Rami is forced to follow him, even though Rami was ready to fight off all of these drunk, racist Oxford students. And this is another instance of us realizing that Robin, he's willing to stand up for what he thinks is right, but only to a certain extent, as long as he doesn't get hurt.
But he is willing to put himself at risk to retrieve Rami's notebook that he left at the bar because he knows that he has that light-skin privilege. And this is where he first meets a group of thieves that have been stealing silver from Babel. And what did you think when Robin just went up and helped these people get away with their theft?
I thought it was uncharacteristically brave in the moment, but it also showed me Robin is willing. He does see right and wrong. He is willing to act on his conscience, especially after the experience of, bailing on Rami. So I was like, okay, yeah, he is willing to, put his neck on the line to a certain extent, we keep saying.
Well, remember what the catalyst was for his emotional impulse to help them was seeing a face that looked just like his own.
Was that before he helped them? Or actually, yeah, you're right. Okay, so what happens is he hears Chinese being spoken, and he was like, "What is that noise? Where is that coming from?" And that's how he discovers the thieves.
Yeah,
and one of the thieves is trying to activate the stolen silver bar by speaking in Mandarin, but it's not working. So that's how Robin steps in to help because he knows that he is the only person who can provide help in that aspect. There's no other Chinese person around. So he's like, okay, well, it's on me.
Yeah. And so I thought it was super interesting that emotionally he still wants to help his people. And that's what drives him, right? He still subconsciously, I think, has that line between us and them because that line is something that the world never lets him forgive. What I found really interesting about book 2 and their experience in Oxford is even though Babel welcomes them as, scholars, you start to realize that they're really more just resources, and they will never be seen as one of them, right? There's always this line that they can ignore, but they can never escape from. And I think that's, at least from my reading, that's kind of the subconscious. Like once he sees that there's someone that looks like him that's trying to do this thing, that is obviously like a crime against the organization that he belongs to, his first instinct is to help the person that he sees as his own people.
Yeah.
So like it's a really clever way for Rebecca to like start laying the groundwork for like when push comes to shove, Robin will probably make the right decision if his brain doesn't get in the way first.
Yeah, like you realize like, okay, yeah, there's some work to be done on his character growth. But we move on to the orientation day of Babel, and Robin meets his two other schoolmates. Victoire, who is born in Haiti and raised in France, and Letty, who is a white girl and a daughter of a powerful admiral, and who was born and raised in Britain. And this is when we realize, oh, okay, women are being snuck into Oxford. Because Oxford is known to be a male-only college, but they're like, okay.
Yeah, what did you think of all the patriarchy at play here? Like the fact that Letty and Victoire have to live off campus, and that they aren't allowed to do things like go to a bookstore or go to a museum on their own.
It was expected because it's the 1830s. And I thought it was a really clever way to once again show the hypocrisy of the institution being like, okay, like we'll use you as a resource, but we won't treat you as if you're one of our own. You belong here to a certain extent, but only until you're useless.
Yeah, it's just another example of an allegory for the British Empire, right? Like, or colonialism in general is just, we want your stuff, we want your resources, we want the things you can provide, but we don't necessarily want the people. We'll deal with it as much as we have to, but like, we're really here for the goods.
Yeah, and you realize that Babel is very different from the rest of Oxford, not in just, letting in students of marginalized backgrounds, of color, students who are women, but also Babel gets a lot of funding. They, are able to give stipends to all of their students, and they have a lot of privileges. They can really go in any building and demand whatever resources they need, and they would be given it. So you see that Babel is like the pinnacle of privilege. Like it is the best place for people of color to be, because it is the only place that they're allowed to actually be valued, actually like right? Be valued.
Yeah. So we probably should have talked about this at the beginning, but is it Babel or Babel? Because the audiobook
I think
says
it's
Babel,
both,
but we've used both throughout this podcast.
Well, like I the narrator uses Babel in terms of calling it the school, and then they're called babblers colloquially by the rest of Oxford. I personally call it Babel because I just think about the Tower of Babel and Babylon, so that's just where my mind goes. But I think they're both correct. I mean,
okay,
accents are accents.
I'm just, noticing that you switched to Babel just now.
To Babel, to Babel. Listen, okay, like I have a very bad habit of picking up pronunciations from other accents. It's bad.
It's okay. I wish I could read in like accents. Like that's part of the reason why I switched back to the audiobook or read along with the audiobook, is because I want to hear the Irish brogue. I want to hear that that French accent from Victoire.
Oh, it was really, I don't know if it was jarring for you, but their orientation is led by a graduate student named Anthony, and he is a Black student from the West Indies. And as I was listening to the audiobook, he speaks in an American accent. And it was just like so jarring because I was like, wait, like I've been listening to a British narrator this entire time. And you know how like we always say, oh, I don't have an accent, like, but that's not true. Everybody speaks with an accent. And I was like, wow, American accents. It really sticks out like a sore thumb among British speaking characters.
No,
so
we can't let the British center themselves. They've centered themselves for centuries. Let's, we are the empire now.
Yes.
What did
imperialist
you think of
power gets transferred throughout history? But anyway, go on.
What did you think of the cohort, like Victoire and Letty?
I was side-eyeing Letty the entire time.
She was kind of
like,
a basic,
right? You're one of those people. Oh, you're like the token white girl. Well, quote unquote token, but meaning like she's the white girl who is gonna be the one not understanding all of the microaggressions, and either she's going to like learn a lot and try to fix her behavior and be more open-minded and understand how the empire works by oppressing their colonies and just like how harmful that kind of thinking is, or she is going to side with the empire. And I was like, I don't know. She kind of seems like she's going to side with the white people when it comes down to it. So, I did not like her from the get-go.
I mean, she definitely is the type of person who says, well, if they don't want to get in trouble, they shouldn't do crimes.
Yeah, she's definitely the whole like hashtag all lives matter. Speaking of that, okay, like I read a couple of reviews for this book, and the reviews that are like 1-2 star, like I can't help but notice that they're all by white readers. And some of them were saying how it could be racist towards white people, because not all white people are that oblivious, and they're not as stupid when it comes to colonialism. And I was like, huh. So who is this book written for? Like,
I mean,
it made me really question that.
No, there's going to be those types of people. I mean, there was someone who was upset that this book turned dark, and it's like, have you read a R.F. Kuang book? That's kind of her thing.
I mean, they probably have not, but also, have they read dark academia before? Usually something bad happens. Usually something horrible happens, and it's supposed to question whether, the knowledge or magic in that book is, can be used in a bad way.
Yeah. And I mean, there's no one like overtly evil in the book. There's a lot of
I don't know. Professor Lovell is pretty overtly evil, in my opinion, but go on.
I mean, everyone thinks they're like in the right. And, it's not like Letty is like saying things out of malice. It's all ignorance. And I feel like that's kind of something that the story does a good job of portraying, is like kind of the insidious and mundane ways that imperial thought creeps into people, right? The idea that we are civilized, therefore we are better than you. Just the air of superiority that you get from a self-proclaimed status, right? Like the whole idea of what nobility comes from, right? Like, we have money, which means that God loves us, or we have money, which means that it's a reward for us being better people than the commoners, right? Like that's kind of, those ideas are so ingrained in that society.
Yeah, I mean, like Professor Lovell and the other staff at Babel, their stance on why Britain deserves to keep all its silver is because all of the other colonies had opportunities to build their own translation centers. And they had all the time and all the opportunity to, match Britain in their silverworking prowess. And they were just too lazy to, or, they didn't value knowledge or translation enough. They didn't work hard enough to get to where Britain is. And it's like, but don't they realize that Britain is, they pretty much stole the resources from the colonies, and therefore they can't. There's no way that the colonies can catch up.
Yeah, through the end of a gun, right? Through their naval might. It's hard to develop internally when all of your wealth is being sent to a far off island to be used in like mundane ways, right? Like most of the silver in Britain is being used to like warm coffee mugs and, make machines run quieter.
Yeah, I mean, the beginning of book 2 begins with Robin meeting his half-brother Griffin at the Twisted Root. He finds out that Griffin is a dropped-out Babel student and now works for the Hermes Society, which we've mentioned earlier is a ragtag group that is dedicated to redistributing silver to the colonies and helping them fight back.
I don't know if they're ragtag. They seem pretty organized, at least organized enough to be like a whole
organized
decentralized. Organized enough to provide
know.
aid to international resistance movements. I think that's pretty organized.
I guess. I feel like because Griffin is like our first Hermes contact, I guess, it just seems kind of messy in my opinion. I'm like, you guys could probably be more organized, but it's understandable because Babel, we find out, has a ward system. Like it has like magic that prevents people from breaking in or at least leaving the tower with goods.
I mean, silver in this world is used much in the same way that steam is used in a lot of steampunk settings, where it's kind of like a stand-in for Industrial Revolution. But much more sophisticated than like the machines of that era. So we get like things that are kind of more anachronistic, like silver powered security systems that mans like automated turrets, which is something that I didn't really expect from a story taking place in the 1830s.
Yeah, I figured because you have literal magic in this book that some technological advances are going to be much further on than the Victorian era of steam and industrial machines that were built during that time. But this is when Robin works undercover, and his job is to open the Babel doors to the Hermes members. He never sees their faces. It's always at the cover of night, and this is the only risk he is willing to make.
Yeah. He helps them with their heists because there is a biometric lock to the doors of Babel. So only enrolled staff and students can enter the tower anytime, or also trigger the magical automated turrets. And so he moonlights as the inside man for the silver thieves for most of book 2 while attending classes. And what did you think of all like the classroom scenes? Because we get a lot of them during this book, like lectures about entomology, this is when we get our exposition dump about the science of silver working, right?
Yeah, I loved all of that.
Yeah, I really liked these parts too. I was like, I kept rewinding the audiobook to go back because I needed to like refresh on all the lectures just to like make sure I got everything. I felt like I was back in school.
Yeah, it was I definitely felt like I was back in school. I did take a class on linguistics back in college, and it reminded me so much of the lectures there. And, like the thing I love about dark academia is that, like, being nerdy is considered a superpower in a way. And I just love the fact that the only way to make silver working work is for Babel students to read a lot. Like, it's not just enough to be fluent in a language. You need to know like where the terms come from, how they relate to other languages, the history of how language is affected by other cultures. And I was like, wow, this is so nerdy. I love this. Yeah. This is something that I would definitely have loved as a kid who thought herself as like a very brainy nerd. So.
Yeah, I mean, like we mentioned, the magic from silver working comes from capturing the power of what's lost in translation when you translate words to English. And, it's really funny that we were reading this book after our chat with Anton Her, the translator of I Want to Die But I Want to Eat Tteokbokki, because I feel like that conversation kind of primed me for these concepts, right? The fact that there is no one-to-one between any language, right? Like even between Latin languages, certain words, certain sayings mean different things, have different connotations. And, what is the role of the translator? Is it to translate the author's meaning as closely as possible to the original intent, or to translate it in spirit so the reader can understand the author's original meaning? And, this is where we get that, like, I think this is a quote that is often attributed to this book, which is like, translation is an act of violence toward the original.
Yeah, I have the actual quote right here. Translation means doing violence upon the original, means warping and distorting it for foreign, unintended eyes. So then where does that leave us? How can we conclude except by acknowledging that an act of translation is then necessarily always an act of betrayal?
Yeah, which I think is just such a powerful passage that really illustrates like the insidiousness of Babel as an institution. Like their job is to do violence to other cultures.
Yeah, it's to use their language and use it as a weapon against their colonies. A great example of this is during their during their junior year, like the year where it's like crunch time for them. And they get their own advisors for like their dissertations, kind of. Victoire, she wants to have her dissertation on Haiti Creole, but her professor, her advisor says, well, like no one really cares about that language. So like use actual French. But at the same time, he's always like, well, maybe you can write about voodoo culture. And she's just like, well, that's not something that is meant for people who are not from Haiti. Like it's religion. It is sacred to my people. So it's not something that I'm willing to just make it accessible to English readers. And Letty has a moment where she is very ignorant and says, well, why do you care? You're French. You're civilized.
You're not religious.
And I was like, oh my God.
Yeah,
wrong thing to say.
Not a good moment for Letty in our eyes. One of many Letty moments throughout the book.
But I feel like
so
it's
far.
a moment that all of us who are of racial minority can, like, we've experienced this before.
Oh,
where someone says, like,
told,
why do you...
Oh, you're one of the good ones?
That, or just saying, like, you're American. Why do you care about what's happening in China or Korea or like whatever home country?
Yeah.
And when it comes down to it, it's like where does your loyalty lie? And it's like so stupid.
Yeah. Their third year apprenticeship is also, isn't this where we learn the real reason why people like Rami and Robin are so valued? And it's because they're fluent in a language that is of a different, like,
not romantic, not Latin. It's untapped resource, untapped material.
Because we learned that the powers of silver bars that use Latin or romantic languages as like their base are losing their power because of the growing power of English. I thought it was really cool how they explained that the power of language is always shifting, and as the power of the British Empire grows, so does the power of English, which means the difference or the gap of language and what's lost in translation is getting smaller and smaller because, as English starts taking words and sayings and phrases from their empire, from their neighbors, it starts becoming part of their own language. And so it stops being something that needs to be translated.
Yeah, I mean, languages affect each other. And, we see that across history, which is mentioned in this book. I mean, there was the Roman Empire, and then after they declined, there were the Spanish, and then there were the Habsburg, which were pretty much like the first global empire that's able to really take silver working to another level. And then you have the French, And then after Napoleon is defeated, the English comes into play. So languages are shifting constantly from Latin to Spanish to German to French to English. So obviously all of these languages are being affected and kind of like growing into a melting pot. And English is kind of like the bastardization of all European languages, in my opinion, because there's just so many loan words. And really, English doesn't make any sense because it borrows so many root words from other countries and other cultures. So I thought that was a pretty fascinating way to dive into that commentary of how languages affect each other.
Yeah.
And how empire works.
Yeah. And this is about the time when we learn about how Babel and by extension, the British Empire is running low on silver reserves because of a trade imbalance with China. China, there's a huge demand for Chinese goods such as like furniture and porcelain and tea. And the Chinese Empire, they don't care about British products. Like they don't find any beauty or they don't find any value in that, but they do find value in silver. So a lot of silver is being sent to China in return for Chinese goods. And historically, this is something that really happened, the trade imbalance, because this is pretty much what leads to the Opium Wars, which I think is pretty much on the horizon in this story. We'll probably see
book,
it. Yeah. Because, the Opium Wars is basically, in order to fix that trade imbalance, the British forces China to allow them to sell opium to their citizens. And when China says no, they start a war over it. Like, I don't know how many people realize that the Opium War, like the reason why Hong Kong became a British territory, is all because England wanted to sell drugs to China in order to solve a trade imbalance.
Yeah, they wanted to sell drugs to China so that they could be addicted and buy more drugs and spend more money and tip the trade balance back in their favor.
They want to make that money back by selling drugs. And, the irony is those drugs are coming from like India, right? They're coming from other colonies.
Yeah.
So,
the irony.
Yeah. So there's rumblings on that now on the horizon. For those of us who know history, we're like, uh-oh, I know what that is.
Yeah, and Griffin warns Robin later on that it gets really hard to stay in Babel as a student because of ethics, because you're going to be assigned to sell drugs to China.
Or like make weapons or enslave your own people, maybe.
Yeah, use translation, even for it being an interpreter, like using translation as a way to swindle your motherland country. So Robin is just like, okay, but Babel is the only place that I belong. Oxford is this utopia where I get to purely pursue knowledge and have all this luxury.
Or he can be a good model minority.
Yeah, it's like as long as you support the empire, you're good. Your education is funded. You're able to do whatever you want. You have your creature comforts. You just have to turn a blind eye at the very least.
You have to be grateful for what we provided you and help us do violence to other people.
Yeah, and later in book 2, you find out that Anthony, the black student from the West Indies who was there for orientation, he quote unquote dies.
Mysteriously dies, which he definitely joined Hermes, right?
Yeah, because Griffin says like, oh yeah, a lot of Babel students drop out because of ethic issues, and you just have to fake your death and hope that you don't get caught.
I mean, he did a pretty terrible job in hiding it when Robin brought it up to him that a student named Anthony died, and he's like, oh yeah, I think I know that guy. I mean, I knew that guy.
I knew that guy.
I think,
but right, like I was just like, "There's no way, like he's alive."
I mean, is that the same conversation where you find out why Griffin was abandoned by their father?
Yeah, it is. Robin finds out that Griffin is unable to dream in Chinese, and he failed his third year exam, so he wasn't able to get into silverworking. And rather than sticking around to do like translation for literature or legal, it's like his father was like, if you're not going to be doing silver working, what value are you to me and this empire?
It's such a interesting, I guess, illustration of the act of being someone where English may not be your main language or may be your second language, right? Because I learned Chinese from speaking with my parents growing up, and I learned English from watching television. And so sometimes I do find myself still thinking in Chinese. And, you know, I've heard the same from my friends for whom English is a second language, where they need a second to translate what they want to say from Chinese or from their language to English before speaking.
Yeah. And, you know, I really related to Griffin, who says like, oh, you don't know the pain of losing your native tongue and to not be able to dream in Chinese anymore. I was born in Seoul, and I immigrated to the States when I was 3. And, you know, that fact has always kind of been used against me by other Korean American parents who will be like, oh, you were born in Korea, so why isn't your Korean like super fluent? Like, why haven't you retained your Korean vocabulary? And I'm just like, well, when you grow up here, like it's so easy for the language to slip away because you're not using it. And I had the disadvantage of having to use English in my household. So I didn't really get that extra practice of using Korean with my parents. Now it's like a mix of Konglish, and my mom gets very frustrated because she's just like, why are you unable to just have a pure conversation with me in Korean? And I'm just like, because that's how I was raised, and you can't just expect me to like be perfectly bilingual when that was just like not the experience that I had. But yeah, a lot of Asian Americans have that same experience as Griffin, where you came to your adopted country like at a weird age where like your native tongue gets kicked out of your brain, like one takes over the other. And it's really interesting because my cousin and her sons, they came to America to like stay briefly because she wanted her kids to be exposed to the English language and to the culture. And it was just fascinating because her youngest son was 3 years old, and you know, all he did was talk in Korean. Like he had a really hard time picking up English. And then all of a sudden one day he only spoke in English. Like he could not go back into Korean. And it was just shocking because it was just like his mind got wiped and everything got rewired into English. And it just like made me wonder, is like, is that what I went through as a kid? Is that what my parents experienced when I suddenly switched from native tongue to English?
I mean, I'm sure there's also social pressures and, you know, things that kids go through. I'm sure for Griffin, having a racist father who is a white supremacist didn't help in his like language skills as well, right?
Yeah, and of course, like English is used as, you know, the currency of the rich. So if you go to like East Asia, if you're able to speak English or if you studied abroad, you're considered upper class and you're considered quote unquote superior to other Asians in that country.
I mean, that's just the scars of imperialism on all of our cultures, right?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
But after this is when Robin gets shot, right? This is when he gets shot, like on the job.
Yeah, he's on a routine job, and the wards got changed because there have just been more robberies, but not done by the Hermes Society. They've been
So Professor Playfair, their main professor, I guess, he's such an interesting guy because he seems like a affable, jolly dude. But man, he really loves making his death traps.
Yeah, he's very sinister.
And it seems like, I think the first person that got shot in that chapter, I think it was a professor, and the wards just malfunctioned, right?
I don't think the wards malfunctioned. I think what happened was so there were like a bunch of robberies that were being done by protesters who were protesting silver making because they're from the
protest started.
Yeah. Because they're like mill workers or factory workers, and they're saying that silver working has cost them their jobs because they're being replaced by machines being run by silver. So there have been more robberies being attempted at the Babel Tower, but because they're not part of the Hermes Society, they don't know that there are wards protecting the tower. So after a couple of thieves getting arrested, Professor Playfair is like, okay, I'm going to update the wards so that it will help us with like the robberies.
I think he updated it so that the wards can sense intent now, which
sense intent, because before
just some
it was
magic
like
bullshit right there.
Well, like before it was like okay, like as long as you have as long as you're like bio authenticated by the tower, you're able to open the door, get in and out, whatever. But what happens is Robin gets shot accidentally because he steps into like the doorway of the tower and outside. I think that's what happens. Like he missteps and then he gets shot because the tower knows that he's not there for a good reason. He's there to help thieves steal silver. And that's a turning point for him because he's like, oh, snap, I've been hurt. Got physically hurt.
And, now that he's been hurt, the danger is now real to him, and now he wants out. And then it takes a couple chapters for him to actually quit because Griffin, like all heist gone bad, needs to lay low for a while. But during that time, he's just like stewing about it.
Yeah. And also, there's the stress of exams, and he's just like, I have so much to lose if I am kicked out of school, and he just thinks that it's not worth it.
Right? Wasn't this when we're shown the public humiliation of like what happens if you don't make it past your third year?
Yeah.
Which reminds me a lot of like
hazing from like fraternities.
Yeah, like a lot of like old institutions, they love their rituals, right? They love their cloak and dagger, skull and bones, like all that stuff. And this reminds me of like, it's basically the institution flexing its power for no reason than to just like power trip, really.
Yeah, and to warn other students like, hey, this could happen to you. So like take your studies seriously. If you're not of use to us, you're easily replaceable.
And it works. It works on Robin. He's like, oh no, I need to be a good
I think it would work
boy.
on anyone. I mean, it is a traumatic, like it's traumatizing.
And so we end book 2 with Robin informing Griffin that he's out. He can't do this anymore. Justifying to himself that he wouldn't have been able to make a difference anyways.
Yeah. And also Griffin comes up with a riskier assignment for Robin. He's like, hey, so there's this shipment of silver that's coming. Kind of need you to plant a bomb of some sorts. I think that was what happened. But Robin is just like, no, I already got shot from just opening a door. There's no way I'm going to stick my neck out for a riskier operation like this. And that's where book 2 ends.
Yeah.
So, yeah, like predictions for book 3, 4, 5, Marvin.
I mean, he gets pulled back eventually, right? This is called Babel, or the necessity of violence. So I imagine, obviously, the Opium War will play a big part in his like radicalization, right? Because as we know, Robin is a wuss, but if things affect him personally, he has been known to make emotional decisions. And it's going to be hard to justify playing a role on the side of Empire during the Opium Wars.
Yeah, I mean, with like the Tower of Babel in terms of like biblical references, I mean, the Tower of Babel falls, it collapses.
Right. Such hubris to name their institution after a known disaster in the Bible, right?
I mean, their official name is called the Royal Institute of Translation. People just call it Babel colloquially because it's a literal tower and there's a bunch of people who can speak multiple languages.
And also the hubris.
Yes. I don't know if the institution will collapse. That's just me being very cynical. But I do believe that there will be a good attempt.
I can see it. This is an R. Kuang book. She loves to tear down her worlds and in the process make all of her characters suffer, which it's actually been pretty light on suffering for these first 2 books. So I'm expecting a lot of pain to come as we get into the next parts.
Yeah, I mean, it's called The Arcane History of the Oxford Translators' Revolution. So I'm guessing that the translators are going to band together at one point to overthrow the institution. However, I feel like the empire is too strong and they're still going to be left standing at the end of this book. But I feel like they're going to make a good attempt and there are going to be reforms from I guess their revolution. So
I think it all burns down.
I mean, that would be nice. That would be that would be good fantasy. But I'm just thinking of like historical context. The British Empire does not.
But this is an AU
collapse until later.
You know, we can't.
Yes, but it's an AU based on a lot of real history. So I don't know. Yeah, I'm really curious as to what levels of violence I will see in book 3, 4, and 5. Because, like we said, the Opium War is on the horizon. So I can only assume that there's going to be some body count towards the end of the book.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking forward to finishing this book. It was really hard to put down at the appointed time. I was just really enjoying all the characters, and we didn't dwell a lot of time on it, but the relationship between the cohorts, specifically between Rami and Robin, was just so fun to read. They're into each other, right?
Yeah, they're totally gay. They're totally gay, and I just love the fact that like Rami is so outspoken about how terrible the Empire is, and he's always bickering with Letty, and Robin is just like, I just want peace. Like, can't we just all get along? And the dynamics with all of the 4 characters, it's very funny to watch, and I think it's really endearing as well. It really brought back like memories of like my school days where that was all I had to worry about. Like I didn't have to worry about like real world problems. I just had to worry about like passing my exams and whatnot.
Yeah. And, I have a feeling that Rami's the type of person. I feel like Robin should have just told Rami what's going on, because Rami would be like, revolution, I'm in, because he has
100%. But also like Robin, he's a good friend. He doesn't want to endanger his buddies. And he knows that Rami, because he is a brown guy, he's not going to get the leniency that Robin would get, especially since Professor Lovell is his dad.
Yeah. Robin is a Nepo baby, right?
Yeah, I mean, he didn't have to take an entrance exam. Oh, this is something that we didn't talk about, but like, so there are people in their dorm who are from different colleges, and they don't get like extra funding. They have to pay an exorbitant amount of tuition, and it's just like the way that some of those students are like, oh, it must be nice that, you're able to just go to Babel without paying a single cent. Wow, you're like living the life. and I was just like, wow, that's kind of like how, a lot of people complain that like minorities have it easy for college applications because they're a minority, they're able to get in easier.
But there was also that scene where Robin gets invited to the rich boy party, and the rich boys try to impress him with their poetry. And
oh my God, that was my favorite scene ever. It was so funny.
And he was like, these guys are all idiots. Why am I here?
And, like he asked them, like, what are you going to do after graduation? And they're like, oh, what am I going to do? Doing is for peasants. And I was like, wow, okay. nothing has changed because I definitely have met those types of people at my school and other workplaces. So
yeah. Another one of my favorite parts was that aside when I think it was in his second year when he decides to join the rowing team. And I thought I got a kick out of it because it's such a sneaky way for Rebecca to make her character hot now, right?
I mean, I guess.
It's because he gets buff while doing rowing. And she's like, yeah, so Robin's hot now. And it's because he rows.
I mean, he could have always been hot. We don't know what he looks like.
Well, I mean, he was scrawny, right? And then he becomes like a rower.
He was scrawny because, like, he was scrawny as a kid. Everyone goes through, like, a growth spurt. I don't know. Not to say that, like, there's only one way to be hot. You know, you don't have to be freaking muscular to be considered hot. But rowing is such a British sport that I was just like, wow, we really are in England. Like, someone, like, is Rami going to play cricket? Like,
I mean, the girls joined the fencing team, right? Because then they could be under masks. Yeah. That was fun too.
Yeah, that was fun too.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're coming out of the fun school times arc and entering the impending war arc. And I am very excited to see where this goes because Robin as a hero isn't there yet. You know, he knows what the right thing is, but he doesn't have the courage to do it, right? Like in terms of like his hero's journey, he has now rejected his call. You know, a long time to get to that first step, but...
So my prediction is that Rami and Victoire are definitely going to be part of the Urmi society because as dark-skinned people, they have so much to lose as people who are benefiting from their privileges, but also they kind of receive the worst treatment ever.
Well, they're also already having anti-imperial sentiments, so it makes sense for them to be sympathizers at the very least, right?
Yeah, and they have more of a reason to support their motherland. So, I mean, like for example, like Anthony, we find out that he was a slave, and Babel bought his freedom, quote unquote, bought his freedom in order for him to become a student at Babel.
All of the discussion of stuff like abolition and like, oh, now we have to like pay for it's such like she captures really well what they probably were all talking about in those inner circles at that time.
Yeah. Like we see with Anthony, like he was, even though he was a Babel student, there was a lot that he could have been fighting for. And I see the same case with Victoire, who is from Haiti. And there's just a lot of oppression that's happening there. So I can see her being like, fuck Babel. I'm going to drop out and join the revolution. So I can see her doing that. And obviously Rami, he's always been outspoken about the empire being oppressive on its colonies. So I can see him joining. And then Robin, because he kind of has like his foot half like 1 foot in the door, 1 foot out the door in terms of revolution. I'm sure one of the two are going to kind of pull him into the direction of revolution.
Well, I mean, like we mentioned, right? Like with Rami and Victoire specifically, they are othered just by virtue of just how they look, right? Their standing in society is just much more precarious, and they experience like overt racism way more than Robin does. I mean, Robin himself notes that he doesn't experience like the full brunt of the racism that like Rami does when they go out. So I think you're right. I think the chance of them being radicalized is way higher because in a sense they're already radicalized, right? Like you can't exist as like minorities, like of a colonized people without always being aware of that fact.
Yeah, and it's something that we see in our society today. Like Asian people, a lot of Asian people align with white supremacism because the level of oppression that we feel, it's different from the oppression that Black people and brown people feel in this country. So yeah, like I think Rebecca did a really good job, like making these four characters schoolmates, and it just like gives them a dynamic that really makes you question, like, okay, like the insidiousness of Babel and the Empire, and they all have different experiences. And I just thought she did a good job with her cast.
Yeah, definitely a lot of viewpoints to give us a lot of different perspectives, and just a really solid portrayal of the, like you said, the insidiousness of empire disguised through academia, through the pursuit of knowledge, through the accumulation of knowledge as a resource. It really makes you think about like the nature of empire and what empire needs to do to sustain itself, and why empires are ultimately unsustainable, because you can't keep treating people like resources.
Yeah. And of course, like we mentioned this before, but the level of research that Rebecca went through to like get the etymology and like all of the linguistics like super detailed in this book, I really appreciated it. And I feel like, you know, I feel like I should learn a language. Like I really should put in the effort. Maybe go back and brush up on my Korean and actually be a bilingual person.
Yeah, inspiration.
Also made me really hungry for scones, because British high tea, like tea time in England, it's so good. The one thing that they got right.
But that tea comes from Asia.
That tea comes from Asia. Their scones come from Scotland.
All right. Well, I guess on that note, let's put a pin on our discussion of Babel. We'll be back at the end of this month to finish the last 3 books of Babel, and we'll see if our predictions come true or not. Will everything get burnt down, or will the empire continue to reign? I guess needless to say, our book club pick for this month is still Babel by R.F. Kuang. So if you're reading along with us, we will be discussing books 3 through 5 at the end of the month. If you've already finished the book, please let us know your thoughts on our Goodreads forums. As always, we love to include your feedback on our future podcast episodes. We actually did get some feedback for this first half from one of our listeners. Catherine writes, 5 stars from me. So creative. The idea of language being the building blocks for the world we live in is a cool premise. Kuang put so much into this book, but it didn't feel overwhelming to me. I like how she explored the relationship between Robin and the professor. The exploration of the white savior trope through Robin, Rami, and Victoire's experience is something I haven't seen that much in pop culture. At least the feeling of not having to feel grateful for being saved. Of course, I have some things I didn't like, but I'll wait for the January thread. As usual, the food descriptors were on point. Food talk in books is a bright spot for me. The way they would buy and share baked goods for each other was cute, just very college cute. So yeah, definitely agreed with you on the food aspect of it. I don't really have a love for tea time or British tea time, so I'm still trying.
You don't like sandwiches? You don't like pastries?
I just haven't experienced it that often. I do like a good tiny sandwich, I guess. Scones are fine.
You don't like clotted cream? You don't like desserts, pretty much?
What's a clotted cream?
Oh my goodness. All right. Well, I need to take you to high tea time. There's a couple of places in my town, thankfully.
Yeah.
So, we're going to be doing that.
Let's live out our imperial dreams by sampling the wares of the empire.
I mean, it's food is food, all right? Like, have you never been curious about it, Marvin?
I mean, I know my mom likes that
stuff. Have you not? Okay, are you a sweet tooth person?
I do like sweets, but I like Asian sweets, which usually aren't as sweet as like European ones,
Okay, so I mean, like growing up, like even when I didn't go to places where they served English tea, like my friends and I would have tea parties. So we would prepare like our own like miniature sandwiches and scones and cookies and pie. It's a lot of fun, and it's something that the British got right. I will tell them that. And their tea time definitely influenced Asia. You see people in Singapore and Malaysia who still adopt the tea time ways of the Brits. So
I mean, it better be good. They went to war with us for it, so
I know, that's true. Yeah. Yeah. But tea time's good. Yeah, we should take you sometime.
Yeah, we can do we can have a Books and Boba tea time meeting, I guess.
Yes.
All right. Well, Rira, as always, thanks for joining me as we talk about Asian American books. Looking forward to another year of doing this with you. We got a lot of cool stuff in the works. Lots of author interviews coming up later this month. And yeah, stay tuned for more developments from Books and Boba. We're excited to share some new things that we're working on with you in the coming months.
Yay.
All right. Well, thanks for listening. And we'll see you all next time. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to Books and Boba. This podcast was hosted by Marvin Yue and Rira Yu and edited and produced by Marvin Yue. Follow the book club on Twitter and Instagram by going to @BooksandBoba and engage with us on Goodreads on our Goodreads group. You can also check out past episodes of the podcast by going to booksandboba.com and by subscribing to us on your favorite podcast app. Don't forget, you can support Books and Boba and Asian American authors by purchasing books at our bookshop.org account. Check out the link in our show notes and also at booksandboba.com. Books and Boba is a proud member of the Potluck Podcast Collective, a collective of Asian American hosted podcasts featuring unique voices and stories from the Asian diaspora. Learn more about the collective and check out our fellow Potluck shows by visiting the website podcastpotluck.com. Thanks for listening.
Hey, Sharon.
Hey, Raman.
How are folks still racist?
I know, right? We're like 2 decades into the 21st century.
Yeah, and second question, where's my jetpack?
Well, I can't help you there, but have I got a podcast for you. Modern Minorities is a show where each week my longtime pal Raman and I uncover common and uncommon truths that we all need to hear for our majority brains and ears.
Yeah, Sharon and I have spoken to doctors, lawyers, directors, climate activists, angry Asians, athletes, chefs, writers.
Folks who are Black, brown, gay, straight, and everything in between.
Past guests have included comedian Margaret Cho, Southern Poverty Law Center journalist Geraldine Mariba, comics creator Jean Lun Yang, and many, many more.
We've even talked about Ramadan, Black History Month, Kamala Khan, and Robin being queer.
It's like we're trying to solve racism with the podcast.
Challenge accepted.
So check out Modern Minorities at modmypod.com or wherever you get your favorite podcasts.
Remember, we're all modern minorities, but we're no one's model minority.